Welcome back. I'm here at the Castle Gandolfo, the Pope's summer residence in Rome, and it's the Raising Hope conference where the Pope has gathered hundreds of climate leaders around the world that have their own platform to mobilize and coordinate the climate movement. It's people with religion, people with other religions, and people with non-religion. Everyone is invited here to work together in this big global partnership for our planet. And with me, I have an amazing change maker, and I will let you introduce yourself. Tell the viewers who you are and what you do.
My name is Kumi Naidu. I'm the president of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Initiative.
And as a president of the Non-Fossil Fuel Proliferation Treaty, it's really hard to say that. It's a long name.
Yeah. It's the worst name of anything I worked for.
And no, I have experienced one that is even worse, and that is a Laudato movement that is hosting this conference. It's even harder to pronounce it. But it's not about the name, it's about what we want to achieve. And before this conference started, it was a big press conference at the Vatican that I participated in. And if you haven't seen it, I think you will be very glad to hear what the media picked up. They said like this, because Arnold Schwarzenegger is one of the speakers invited here, and the media gave this headline: Arnold Schwarzenegger is at the Vatican and to terminate
fossil fuels.
How did you feel when you read that?
Positive statement. Let's be blunt about why we've been failing. If we do not turn off the tap on fossil fuels, we are not addressing the root cause, 86% of the problem. So therefore, more people should have been saying much earlier that we have to get out of our addiction of fossil fuels. Imagine this. The climate negotiations, the so-called COPs, has been going on for 30 years now. It took 28 years before 86% of the problem of climate change was even mentioned in an outcome document of COP.
And they try to remove it, the COP off.
Absolutely. So, that's as absurd as Alcoholics Anonymous holding 28 years of conferences with tens of thousands of people at each year, and they don't have a backbone at the end of the conference to mention alcohol in the outcome document, right? And if you stay with that analogy, there's a reason for that. And that is the largest delegation to the COP is not the host country normally, is not even US or Europe collectively. The largest delegation to the COP each year, and it's getting more and more, is the fossil fuel lobbyists, right? So that's like Alcoholics Anonymous having a global conference where the largest delegation to the conference is the alcohol industry. So this is long overdue. Thankfully, we now have at least 20 countries that have stepped forward, including 3 fossil fuel exporting countries, East Timor, Timor-Leste, Pakistan, and Colombia, who say that we have to start negotiations as soon as possible to get a non-proliferation treaty. And the good news is we got good momentum. The Colombian government has already called, just last week at the UN General Assembly, for the first international diplomatic conference for the phase out of fossil fuels in April in Bogota. And we hope next year, April, will be the start of the negotiating process. Now, some people will say, in this global environment, how can you even be thinking about doing this? So here's the roadmap we are following. Similar to the landmine treaty, where 44 nations negotiated the treaty in Ottawa, Canada, outside of the UN system. And then once the treaty was negotiated with the countries who were serious, high emission, who accepted the brutality of fossil fuels and so on, landmines, and then that was taken into the UN system and ratified there. So there was a Kevin Costner movie called Field of Dreams that older viewers and listeners might be aware of an Iowa corn farmer who keeps having this dream that if he clears out a patch in his cornfields and builds a baseball, the legends of the past will come and have a game. And the tagline that he keeps hearing in his dream is, if you build it, they will come. So we are convinced once April comes next year, the conference happens, by then we expect to have about 30 or 40 countries on board that will attend, and we hope that will kickstart the negotiations. And we actually we'd rather not have countries that are denying the science, denying the urgency, and so on, be in the early conversations, because they'll hold us back and they'll pull down ambition. And we want the countries who totally accept the science.
Here, the fossil fuel lobbyists, they are not invited.
Yeah.
I haven't seen one, at least. And there was news coming out from this meeting, posted in Daily Mail, where they said the headline were that the woke Pope are doing bizarre blessing around ice and the planet. That's maybe another way to describe what's going on here. We had the Trump speech at the UN just the other week, where he said that transition is the most woke and fake thing, con job.
I mean, we have to recognize that the attack on science is also not simply on climate. One of the biggest attacks on science is on medical science. And Republican lawmakers have deep anxiety about, vaccines for children being withdrawn or challenged and so on. So I think it's probably important that a voice like the Pope's, who happens to be an American for the first time, maybe that's the voice that actually can shift the Republican Party to get back to following science and hopefully standing up to the policies that Donald Trump is putting forward, which is not in the interest of the American citizens, not in interest of humanity as a whole. And I think that extreme weather events have been rising in the United States, not simply, wildfires in California, but I think ordinary people will stand up eventually based on what they are seeing in their lives and their livelihoods.
And to be clear to the viewers, the Pope did not address Donald Trump or criticize anything. He's only pro-science, and some others are saying that by being pro-science, they are against some people. But I mean, this campaign is not against Donald Trump either. This is pro-science, and as you said, so many people
Well, let me just interrupt.
like science.
You cannot say you are pro-science and then say I'm aligned to Donald Trump, right? Because Donald Trump is anti-science on multiple, right? So I'm not saying you have to be anti, but you have to be opposed to the fact that he's undermining science in multiple different areas, right? And also, it's not just about being anti-science; he's anti-truth, right? I mean, there is no political leader in the history of the United States or in the history of the democratic world spews out the number of lies on a daily basis. So we need to recognize that all of us have a simple choice right now in the interest of our children and their children. We're either part of the problem or we're part of the solution. And people must realize that staying silent, staying neutral, sitting on the fences is choosing to be part of the problem. However, the climate is like such a big thing, and what's the entry point for an ordinary person to enter? Especially with the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, it is national governments that make treaties, right? However, if you look at the example of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, that was built from below. It was civil society, and importantly, it was cities, right? Yeah. There were many cities across the world declared themselves as nuclear-free zones. Right now, as I speak to you, 145 cities and other subnational governments have actually endorsed the treaty. In the United States, for example, the state of California has endorsed, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and about 3 more cities have endorsed, and that's going to grow, right? So the way, if you are not engaged already and you're looking at a way to be engaged, in wherever you live, make the local government where you live as where you take your appeal to. Ask them to endorse the idea of the treaty and get other cities to endorse because like say in a country, if you had a government that was reasonably responsive to public opinion, if you had say 120 local governments in your country and 80 of them endorse the treaty, right? It makes it really difficult for the national government to say, oh, okay, doesn't matter that and understand local governments and states, like in the US, or provinces in other parts of the world, like my country, we have 9 provinces. These are the base units of democracy. And bear in mind, when the climate crisis hits, when extreme weather events hit and rise as it's happening now, it doesn't hit something called the national level. It happens in communities where people live. So my appeal to people who are not yet involved: do 3 things. One, read up on what climate change is, make sure you understand it. There's thousands of resources, online and so on, that you can find. You can visit the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative website and many others, but just improve. And I would say any parent or grandparent who wants to act in the interests of their children and grandchildren, you have an obligation to take a couple of hours of your life just to understand what's happening. Second, once you get the understanding, I'm pretty certain you'll be terrified and you'll be moved to do something about it, right? And then you have 2 options. Option 1, you can mobilize your community and appeal to the local government to endorse the idea of a binding treaty that gets us off fossil fuels. The other thing you can do is, if there are religious institutions, trade unions, NGOs, other forms of organized civil society that you might be part of, encourage them to be part of it. Because right now, there's more than 4,000 civil society organizations, there's an alliance of 22 banks, there's 2,000 religious institutions, there's 145 cities and subnational governments from below that are putting pressure up, and that's the option that I would encourage people to be engaged in. The last thing I would say is, we must also understand why we have failed up to now. And the reason we failed is we've aimed all our narratives at the brain and we've ignored the heart, the body, and the soul. And climate activism suffers a terrible communications deficit, right? I was the head of Greenpeace for 6 years between Copenhagen and the Paris negotiations, and I saw it, very visibly, to see that we are talking. I'll give you a quick example just to make the point. Right? It's a bit of a funny example. So I had occupied an oil rig in Greenland in 2011, and I was in prison in Nuuk, Greenland, for about a week. While I was in prison, I wasn't sure how long I was going to be there. My brother, who's a former political prisoner in South Africa, a leader in the anti-apartheid movement, goes on national television. He's a brilliant guy. He's got PhD, and he's an optometrist and an activist, so he understands a lot of stuff. He goes on national television, and they interview him and they ask, "So why is Kumi in prison? Why did he do this action?" And my brother says, "I don't have a bloody clue. All I know, it's got something to do with climate change, but let me tell you something, it must be really important, because this guy can't swim to save his backside. For him to take this level of risk, it has to be really important." Now, this is my brother, right, who's an activist, a former political prisoner, a Fulbright scholar, PhD, blah, blah, blah. If he doesn't understand, he tells me we are failing. So therefore, I put my energies half time in the fossil fuel treaty and half time building what we call the global artivism movement. So right now, history tells us that mobilizing the power of arts and culture is your best way to reach ordinary people, through song, to dance, through theater, through visual arts, through food, through fashion, and all of these things, because that's where people resonate to. That's where you can connect to people. And lastly, I would say that we have to make our approaches to climate change significantly more people-centric, right? Because one of the tragic errors that we made historically, especially with Western environmentalism, was framing climate change as an environmental problem. Climate change should have been framed as a cross-cutting problem. It's a failure of our energy system, our food system, our economic system, our transport system. And the fact that for far too long we put it in an environmental box, it meant that, like when I became the head of Amnesty International in 2018, I had to get Amnesty International to make the connection between human rights and climate change. That connection should have been made 20 years ago. because we've operated in silos, we need to break down the silos and recognize that if we don't address climate change, whether you're working on, like I always, when I joined Amnesty as Secretary General, I used to say, listen, if the trade union movement is saying we have to be actively involved to address climate change because, and this is their line, the most powerful mobilizational line, they say, because there are no jobs on a dead planet.
So let's start the work, all of us, and just keep pushing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.